The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to our February webinar, Healthy Villages are Smart Villages, Health, Energy, and Development. As usual, this webinar is being hosted by Smart Villages and the Low Carbon Energy for Development Network. Today we have an excellent lineup of speakers, including Joanna Kane-Potaka of ICRISAT, which is the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics. We also have Kevin Mortimer of the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. We have Mike Rosenberg of Alusha, and we have Ian Tansley of SureChill. If you'd like to tweet about the webinar, we're at E4 Smart Villages and at UK LCE DN. And I'll just pop that in the chat for you. So at E4 Smart Villages and at UK LCE DN. Wonderful. And thanks. I see we still have people joining us, so thank you and welcome here today. We'll also have a Q&A session with all four of the speakers at the end, so please send in your questions and let us know which speaker you'd like to answer your question. Okay, so here at the top of the hour, I'd just like to do a couple of quick polls of the audience so that we get to learn a little bit more about you at least. So first I'd like to ask you, where do you live? So we probably have people dialing in from North and South America perhaps, also from Africa and the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. Sorry, I had to include quite a broad range of places in Asia, but hopefully that works out. So I'll give you just a second to finish voting on that, and then I'll share the results with you. And if you're just joining us here today, just now, we are pleased to welcome you to Healthy Villages are Smart Villages. Thanks for being with us today. Great. So I am going to close that and share with you the poll. So great. Okay, a pretty even spread. So we've got 28% in North America, 6% in South America, 20% in Africa and the Middle East, 36% in Europe, and 10% in Asia. So great. Thanks for joining us here today. We're really pleased to have you. And we'd like to ask you one more question about your profession or field of work. So are you perhaps a researcher, a scientist, or in academia? Are you a policymaker or working in government? Are you yourself an entrepreneur or working at a nonprofit? Or do you come to us from the private sector? I'll give you just another minute to finish voting there, and I see we've still got people joining us here today, so welcome everybody. And I'll give you just a few more seconds. Okay, fabulous. Looks like people are still voting. Excellent. We love to see this participation already here at the beginning of the webinar. Okay, so I'm just going to close that poll and share that with you. Wonderful. So we've got 17% here from academia, 12% are policymakers, welcome, 17% are entrepreneurs, 28% come from the nonprofit sector, and 27% from the private sector. So that's really nice. We've got a really nice balance here today. Great. Well, we're excited to get this started actually, and I think we're going to start with our first presenter straight away. Joanna Kane-Potaka from ICRISAT. Welcome.
Great, thanks Molly.
Thanks, Joanna. So I'm just going to send you through a request to share your screen, and we will get that going. And I understand you've got a video for us today too that we'll watch midway through the presentation, so we'll be interested to watch that through GoToWebinar.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. So we'll just give our computers just a second to match up and start showing the screen. Fabulous. Okay, everybody should be seeing it now. And Joanna's going to talk to us about smart food. So I will get off the line and let Joanna continue, but I'll probably pop back in when we show the video. Okay, thanks Joanna.
Great, thanks Molly. Okay, well, it's great to have an opportunity to talk about this new concept, smart food. But before I start, I wanted to clarify where this fits in within the context of smart villages, which really focuses largely on alternative energy sources. But the team behind Smart Villages initiative really has a very similar view to ICRISAT, and that is that a holistic approach is not important, it's actually really critical to take that approach. And you can't get the full impact out of any one intervention if you don't take the whole system you're working within into account. So smart food is really one other component in that system that a smart village operates in and needs to be part of the solution. However, at the end of explaining smart food, I will challenge that this isn't enough just to incorporate smart food. So I'll come back to that. Okay, so just to explain smart food, it's a new concept where we identify foods that have 3 criteria. So good for you, good for the planet, good for the farmer. So good for you, obviously highly nutritious food, and you've probably heard of superfoods, but it's going a lot further than that. So good for the planet, so for example, it may have a very low carbon footprint or water footprint, which is important in the drier areas. And good for the farmer, for example, it may be a climate smart crop, so highly resilient, so important in where there's water scarcity and climate change is impacting, or may have opportunities to increase yields or untapped demand opportunities. But what we've seen as some of the trends that have been happening, we've seen the movement from talking about food security to including nutrition security. The UN has been talking about, more recently, sustainable diets, so looking at diets that also are sustainable on the environment. And I really think the next movement there needs to be talking about smart food. So where it has all that criteria of good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. So it's actually contributing to some of our biggest issues in unison. So it's contributing to rural poverty, malnutrition, climate change, environmental degradation. Not as separate solutions, but smart food will actually help do that in a sort of one approach. Now, the smart villages are working with villages that are off the grid. So they're really working a lot in remote areas, and a lot of it's in very harsh environments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about smart food that's relevant for the dry lands, because the dry lands is 65% of agricultural land. It's where 2.5 billion people are, which is 30% of the world population, and it produces 44% of the world's food. But it also has 93% of the malnourished people are living in the drylands. And the drylands lose 23 hectares per minute to drought and desertification. So it's a hugely critical area that needs to be tackled. It can't be business as usual. So smart food, as well as the smart energy of the smart villages, is really badly needed. So in focusing on these dry lands, the smart food that's particularly important includes foods like millet, sorghum, and legumes. And so under the Smart Food Initiative, we're giving our first attention to these foods. So I'm not sure if many people have heard about or eaten, and I'm only showing a few of them here. Here's pearl millet, finger millet, sorghum. So Molly was going to help run a poll here to see if people have ever eaten these millets or sorghum, so I know if people are aware of them. So I think Molly's going to do that.
Yeah, we'll give people just a second here. And just while we're doing that, Joanna, I just wanted to mention to you, unfortunately, we're not going to have the videos feature today. For some reason, it is part of GoToWebinar Labs, and they're not showing it as available, unfortunately. So many apologies that we won't get to show your excellent video today, but I will, I'm going to reshare the YouTube link that you shared with me so that people can watch that on their own.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I can run it and just put the microphone near my speaker.
Okay. Well, we can try it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So
if you want to do the poll first, Molly?
Okay, let me go ahead and let's see. I think most people have voted, so let me just close the poll and share the results to everybody. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Can you see that? So it looks like everybody.
I can't.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you probably
Maybe
can't as a speaker, but so in response to your question, 61% say yes, they have eaten millets or sorghum, and 39% say no.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Okay. So it's still a significant number that haven't, but that's good. There's obviously some people who know. Okay. So I'll just play a video which gives even people who have eaten it. A lot of people are really unaware of the value that they bring. So I'll just play this. Millets are good for you. Millets tackle some of the biggest micronutrient and health issues. Pearl millet is high in iron, one of the top 3 most common micronutrient deficiencies globally. And bioavailability studies have shown that a meal of pearl millet will provide the average person's daily requirements of iron and zinc. Millets have a low glycemic index, so are really important for preventing and managing diabetes. Finger millet has 3 times the amount of calcium than the equivalent of milk. Kodo millet is particularly high in fiber, having 3 times the amount of total dietary fiber than wheat or maize, and 10 times that of rice. Millets are also high in protein, having at least the equivalent of milk, and pearl millet having double the protein that equivalent of milk has. Also, millets are high in antioxidants and are gluten-free. So millets are good for you, also good for the planet. The water footprint of millets is very low. They use 30% less water than maize, 70% less water than rice. Millets also grow faster. This puts less stress on the environment. For example, millets mature in about half the time of wheat. Millets also grow on minimal fertilizers and pesticides. This is better for the environment and results in a lower carbon footprint. So millets are good for the planet. So millets are good for the farmer, especially if we can develop the value chain. Millets can survive in dry, hot conditions and are typically the last crop standing in times of drought. With climate change, the dry lands are likely to become hotter and have more droughts, making millets more critical as a crop. While other major crops have basically reached a yield plateau, millets have had a lot less investment, so have a much larger potential to improve yields. Many millets have the potential to increase yields 3 times their current level. There are also multiple uses for millets. Stalks are used for fodder, grains for human consumption. They're used as a biofuel. They're used in brewing and many other uses. So millets are good for the farmer. Okay, Molly, so I'll go back to the PowerPoint. So we've shown the value of the millet. What I want to do is talk about what are the problems then. So why aren't they there and already solving some of our issues? And I'm going to explain the problems through a story. So these are some women in eastern Kenya. Now this is a semi-arid tropic area, so very suitable for growing millets and sorghum, and traditionally that's what they grew. Then during difficult economic times, maize was given as the free food aid. And so people got used to eating maize, so they started growing maize. But it wasn't suitable for this environment. So now the millets and sorghum have gone, and 2 generations have gone past, and people are growing maize. But the amazing thing is, that maize survives 1 in 4 years. So 3 and 4 years, the farmers don't have a crop because it's not suitable for that dry area. Yet they continue to grow maize. So when I asked them why, their answer was, well, it's just easier because someone comes to the farm gate and sells the seed. Someone comes to the farm gate and buys the grain. They know they're going to be able to sell it. They know the price they'll get. The value chains are well set up. So now with 2 generations gone past, people don't know what it tastes like. They don't know how to even cook it. So we're working with these communities, not just on how to grow it, but on how to cook it and developing agribusiness and developing the value chain. And just one more example. When I was in Mali and talking with Catholic Relief Services, and they were providing a midday meal for school children, and they wanted to provide millet because it was grown locally and it's highly nutritious. But then they had a negative reaction from the children and even the parents saying, oh, no, 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 we want rice, because rice had become trendy in the urban areas. So everybody wanted rice. So there's a lot of changes that are happening where people are moving out of these traditional foods that are more suitable for the area and more nutritious, and they're going into areas that are less suitable, and it's because there's been a lot more investment in these sort of other crops. There's been a lot more R&D, a lot more product development, a lot more policy support. Even the development aid has gone there. So it's really left behind some of these traditional foods in developing their value chains. So what happens is we've got what we call the big 3 crops of wheat, maize and rice that do receive most of the attention, and so they're more well developed. So we created a food system divide, just like you have an education divide or a digital divide. So what we need to do is learn from what's happened with wheat, maize and rice and bring in more diversity and bring more of these smart foods into mainstream. It's not a case of just starting to popularize it. If we don't actually break the divide and bring other crops into major mainstream, we're not going to make a major difference. So, but our plan is, how can we do this differently? Because, you know, others have tried to bring attention to some of these other crops for decades, and they haven't succeeded. So our plan is to do this differently. So the new approach is really driving it from more a demand side. The consumer demand-driven approach. Change the image, because a lot of these crops are now seen as old-fashioned or crops just for the poor people. And we need to create a buzz around these millets and sorghum. We need to bring in modern convenience products. And we need to develop the whole value chain. But critical in this is ensuring the smallholder farmer benefits. So we've got another whole program that then links the farmers to the value chain so that they benefit. Now we've started some initiatives with smart food. So USAID Feed the Future program has started a smart food program in Kenya, where we're running a major social media campaign. We're working with food processors and we're linking them to farmers. Launch Food, which is a program that Australia and USAID run, where they choose 10 food innovations per year that they think are game changers and help sort of move them forward. So Smart Food's just been selected a few weeks ago there. And in India, we're working with the Indian Institute of Millet Research and the National Institute of Nutrition to see how we can, you know, be a game changer here and bring smart food into mainstream, because these millets and sorghum are traditional crops across India and across many of the countries in Africa. So what would success look like if we could, if these smart villages could be smarter and bring in the smart foods? So we'd have increased incomes for the farmers, we'd have increased production, hence the food security, we'd have better nutrition and health, and this in particular, the women and children would really benefit from this. So that explains very, very quickly the smart food concept, but I did say at the end I'd come back to how we should be integrating smart food into the smart village concept. And what I think is important is that we don't take this multidisciplinary approach, that the interdisciplinary approach is needed. So it's about how we don't just add another element, but how we connect them. And I think there are ways to how smart villages should be influencing, so that the alternative energy sources should be influencing smart food, and smart food should even be influencing what happens for the alternative energy sources or what criteria we use. But I'm not going to go into detail. I'll leave that open for other people to suggest how they thought we could move forward. So Molly, that's it in summary. I didn't time myself, so I don't know if I went too quickly or over time.
That's perfect. I think that's perfect. So thank you so much, Joanna.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. So I think we're going to have quite a lot of interest in that in the Q&A session. I can already see a few questions have rolled in during the course of your talk. And just a reminder to everybody who might have come in a little late, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so please do keep sending in your questions and let us know who that question is for. Okay, thanks so much, Joanna. And we will move to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is going to be Kevin Mortimer. Hi, Kevin. Are you there on the line?
Hello, yes.
Hi, wonderful. So I'm just going to send you a request to share your screen, and we should get that up here in just a second. And I have to apologize to Kevin and Joanna about our video troubles today. You know, since that is a labs feature and it's not showing the icon for sharing a video, unfortunately, today. But hopefully we'll get that right in our next webinar. But I do think Kevin might have found a solution as well as Joanna did to sharing his video with you. And as you can all see, Kevin's presentation is here. And Kevin, please, you have the floor.
Marvellous, thank you. So I'm Kevin Mortimer. I'm a reader in respiratory medicine at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And I've been invited to talk about some work that we did in Malawi that's just been published in The Lancet, which we call the Cooking and Pneumonia Study. I think it follows on nicely from Joanna's talk. And it was nice to see a couple of relevant things to my talk and Joanna's talk, including an improved cook stove and also smart foods, which I might just refer back to. So, theoretically, my plan is to spend about 6 minutes going through some slides, and then the main bit of my talk is given in the film, really, which is a 4-minute film at the end. So I very much hope it will work, but we will see. So to orientate ourselves to Africa, the continent of Africa on the left of the screen there, indicating where Malawi is, and on the right, Malawi, you can see on the north, at the northern tip of Lake Malawi, there's a place called Karonga, and if you look down in the south near the Shiri River, there's a place called Blantyre. Those are the two places where we conducted the work I'm going to talk to you about. Malawi is a very poor country, one of the poorest countries in the world, one of Africa's poorest countries. There's a very poor life expectancy, very high under 5 mortality rate, and pneumonia, a serious infection of the lung, is the commonest cause of death amongst the under 5s. Here's a scene that is replicated across much of sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, almost half the world's population cook on a variation of this theme. This is a 3-stone fire. The fuel that's being burned is wood that's being found for free. And the food that's being cooked is not a smart food, but this is maize porridge. This is the staple food of Malawi. It's the staple food of many sub-Saharan African countries, or at least a variation on the theme is. And perhaps relevant to the smart food discussion that we will have later is that most Malawians would say they have not had a proper meal if they have not eaten sima. But back to the focus of this. So I think you can get a sense that these two women are not particularly enjoying the smoke that's coming off this fire. In fact, more than that, smoke from open fire cooking is responsible, according to the WHO, for some 4 million deaths around the world every year. That's 4 times the number of people that die of malaria or TB. The people die from downstream consequences of the smoke exposure. That's cardiovascular diseases, things like heart attacks and strokes, lung diseases like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and serious lung infections in children. This is a basic day-to-day essential activity, feeding and nourishing the people. In fact, having said that, the maize isn't, the Sema maize porridge isn't terribly nourishing, but it is filling. So let's step back for a moment to look at the world at night. And if you look at the world at night, you can see where the lights are. And where the lights are is where the electricity is, and where the electricity is where the cleanest fuels are, largely. You can superimpose quite nicely on this where the dirty burning biomass fuels are, and much of that is the continent that was somewhat dark in the previous picture, the continent of Africa. There's a lot of red there, and red is bad. That means lots of dirty burning solid fuels, be that wood, crop residues, or the like. It's not just a problem for Africa. As I mentioned, about half the world's population are exposed in one way or another to smoke from dirty burning open fires or basic improved stoves. Here's an improved stove, but it's not terribly improved. This is one in Peru. You can see lots of smoke there. The walls are all black from decades of smoke. The woman and her young child will be breathing in a lot of dirty, polluted air that will be putting them at risk of these health conditions I mentioned. And here's a picture from India just to show a different country, different continent, but same problem. Here, this lady is cooking over a clay stove. It's very smoky. She's burning fuel that's made from dung of animals. So the study we did in Malawi set out to evaluate whether a cleaner burning biomass fuel powered cook stove, shown here working quite nicely with a nice clean flame, might reduce one of those serious adverse health problems associated with biomass smoke exposure, pneumonia in young children. And this is the stove in action, burning nice and cleanly. It doesn't always work quite as nicely as that. And before I go on to show the results, film that also tells a bit of the story of the study, just to highlight a few things that I think are important. One is, and hopefully this might be relevant to the next talk, is that we did a lot of things that many people said we couldn't do, including using technologies that for us are our bread and butter, but in rural Malawi not quite so much. Smartphone technology we used for pretty much all of our data collection. This allowed us to look at data as it came through in Liverpool. We were able to review source documents because we could take digital images of the health documents. Here you can see a health record showing a diagnosis of pneumonia. We could see where our field workers had been through the GPS coordinates that came through from the smartphone. And we managed to keep these fairly high-tech devices alive and going for the 2 years, although with a bit of a struggle. So the next bit, hopefully, is going to be the short film, and that will take us to the end of my talk. So maybe bear with me just one moment. And Molly, would you indicate, please, if this is working or not?
Sure, I will do.
In Malawi, pneumonia is one of the leading causes of childhood death.
Okay, thanks.
With around 15 in 100 under 5-year-olds diagnosed with the disease each year, and an estimated 1,000 young children dying from it. In a country where 95% of households rely on biomass as their main fuel, exposure to smoke from cooking on open fires is likely to be a major cause of childhood pneumonia. In rural Malawi, the CAPS clinical trial, a research initiative led by the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, set out to establish whether the use of advanced combustion cook stoves, which reduce smoke emissions, can prevent pneumonia in under 5-year-olds. In 150 communities, households were recruited to take part and were randomly assigned to the intervention group, who were given 2 advanced combustion cook stoves with a solar panel to charge them, or to the control group, who who kept cooking on traditional open fires. During 24 months of follow-up, all participating households, a total of 10,750 children, were visited every 3 months and monitored on several indicators of exposure to air pollution and for episodes of pneumonia, as diagnosed to WHO standards. Cook stove use and economic and social factors were also evaluated. Across both trial regions, Chikwawa in the southern lowlands and Karonga on the northerly shores of Lake Malawi, there were 16,000 child years of follow-up data for analysis. Despite evidence that women liked using the stoves and used them substantially, no evidence was found that the intervention of 2 advanced combustion cook stoves and a solar charger reduced the incidence of pneumonia in young children. However, the advanced combustion cook stoves reduced the risk of burns and were well liked because they reduced cooking times and fuel consumption.
Even the violet pit, when we were to men, it was chambaur, to pick a marovio, un so con marpiri to do the fruit. To penda to kun to do weta dumla taika pamot.
The CAP study was funded by the UK Department for International Development, the Medical Research Council and the Wellcome Trust. It was conducted to high scientific standards in challenging and remote rural environments in one of the world's poorest countries. The result was clear. On its own, this cook stove intervention was not enough to prevent pneumonia in under 5-year-olds. Possible explanations for this result include that there were too many extraneous sources of smoke to show an effect. Clean air remains out of reach for the majority of the world's poor. The problems of pneumonia in young children and of exposure to household air pollution — globally 4 million people die of household air pollution every year — remain in need of effective solutions.
Thanks, Molly. That's me done then.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. And I've seen some questions coming in during the course of your presentation, so we'll definitely come back to you in the Q&A for to answer some of the questions that people might have had about the study. Okay, thanks so much.
Great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're going to go on to our third speaker now, and that's going to be Mike Rosenberg of Volusia. And let me just go ahead and ask him to start sharing his screen with you, and I will take him off of mute as well. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Molly. Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen. It's at full screen, so you have the floor. Thanks, Mike.
Great. So I'm Mike Rosenberg. I founded Volusia Computers about 10 years ago with a view to providing solar computers.
You know, the sound might have gone out. I don't know if it's the same for others. Hi, hey, Mike.
Yep.
Sorry, the sound went out there. I don't know if it was just me or for other people, but you might want to just repeat what you said for your first slide.
Sure. So our background was providing solar classrooms and solar clinics across primarily Africa. And
The sound does seem to be going in and out, Mike. I'm really sorry about that. So I hear you there now, but it seems to go in and out. Maybe we can just try it one more time.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'll just continue. We had these, so every time we took on a classroom, it was always a unique project, and the challenge was we had to do the site surveys, we had to wire up these classrooms individually, and we kept wanting to figure out a way to make off-grid power easier. And this really came to a head a couple of years ago when we took on a project in Oyo State in southwest Nigeria to put computers and an electronic medical record system we developed to record patient throughput, patient outcomes. And this is just powered on 2 small solar panels. And what we found was that many of these clinics already had solar power. And so you can see here a clinic in, this is actually in Ibadan, the 3rd largest city in Nigeria, but most of it happens to be off-grid. And those solar panels were directly powering a vaccine fridge. And so just as we were dropping in solar computers, there was a solar vaccine fridge. But when we talked to the staff, what they really needed was a more holistic solution. You know, how could you provide solar that powered not just a discrete device, but the entire clinic? So they could have lighting, they could run the water pump, and they could power a range of medical devices. And here's a list from World Health Organization and World Bank's influential white paper. And this shows the huge variety of high impact and very affordable medical devices today: centrifuges, microscopy, CD4 counters. And what you'll notice is that many of these require AC power. And so you can't solve these with the M-COPA and the B-Box and the sort of small scale DC solutions. You need AC power, and that's almost always met with generators. And this is around the same time that Tesla and Sonnen and others were really introducing these large-scale home energy systems. And we thought, well, maybe we could take that solution and put into these clinics so we could power not just an individual device, but the entire clinic. But these were really wired for on-grid use, and their focus was arbitraging between nighttime versus daytime power, or saving people's solar power rather than exporting it to the grid. But we saw this trend of lithium batteries, and the bottleneck with solar and off-grid has always been the batteries. So solar panels are increasingly commoditized and affordable and continue to drop in price as production increases, but the batteries are what hold it back, because they, you know, lead acid batteries will last 1 to 2 years. They're expensive to replace, but the emergence of electric vehicles is starting to push down lithium batteries, which last far longer in terms of cycles. So we took this knowledge and we looked at the challenges we had in the past whenever we set up a small-scale solar solution like the one you see here in Zambia, and we thought, well, what if we could put lithium batteries, all the off-grid electronics, and really put this into one box, which is what we call the solar enabler, and you see that on the bottom right. And you could just plug in panels in the top left, and you could run everything in your primary health center or even your district hospital from that AC power output. And if we could productize solar, we could really put a price on it. So we could, in the utility scale, solar is basically just panels and mounting frames and cabling, and it's very well understood, it's very investable. But in the off-grid side, you have this challenge of projects that are frequently over-spec'd because there's not enough data on the real power consumption of that clinic or of that school, and so you get these incredibly high CapEx prices which are only viable for a few aid programs. And so what we wanted to do was really introduce an off-the-shelf, rapid-deployed, medium-scale solar solution that would run that entire clinic. And this is what we've developed. So because it's 2017, of course it's smart and it has an internet connection. It takes those same lithium batteries that are in a Tesla car or a Tesla Powerwall, but it puts it in a system which is more off-grid oriented. And if you have that intelligence, you can not only introduce predictive maintenance, which is essential for solar in really remote areas, but you can also start to get do interesting things with monitoring power and controlling it. And so what we're now starting to do with the clinics we're deploying this in Kenya and Zimbabwe is set hierarchies. So for instance, the fans will turn off before the lights, and the lights will turn off before the vaccine fridge. And that way you always have core power for those most important and critical appliances. And so when we look at somewhere like Sierra Leone, where we've documented 454 primary health centers, we can give every one of those clinics baseline power for a relatively small amount. And then when we get into conflict areas where Médecins Sans Frontières, our partner, works, where they're spending $5 a liter for diesel, and they're running relatively small, inefficient diesel generators, we can have something which provides break-even within less than 3 months, and which has enormous savings for them long-term. and they can start to get a blueprint of which medical appliances are more efficient. And so we can have medical appliances benchmarked not just on impact per dollar spent, but on impact per watt consumed. And we can develop something that can go into areas where traditionally, no matter what your budget, solar was just too time-consuming, too complex, and would take way too long to install. And so we're now looking at putting these into Northeast Nigeria, delivered on a pickup truck, rapidly put in with the panels just going on a pre-mounted frame on the roof. And these are some of the economics we're coming across for people like MSF. So if we put our system in with its inverter and its battery and its free 3G monitoring for around $5,000 with solar, and solar continues to drop in price, but it's about $100 per panel, then we know in sub-Saharan Africa we can generate about 12 kilowatt hours per day. Now compared to a diesel generator, that means we're saving enormous amounts. So this is $120,000 in savings for a $5,000 product over those 5 years of life cycle. And if we even put them into areas where there's no requirement for solar because they have grid, what we're continuing to find in Crossconnects, this is a graph from a project we're doing in Nigeria, and you can see frequent power cuts, but you can also see the instability of the grid. So instead of it being a nice clean 230 volts, it's all over the place. And what that means is that electronics get damaged, you need to introduce surge protection, and we can start to gather that information to see where the grid is getting worse. And in Zimbabwe, for instance, we have this challenge of the grid is there, but during the rainy season it's not, because the transmission lines fall down, there's no maintenance, and so clinics that were delivering cesarean sections are suddenly in the dark and back to using kerosene lamps and little LED lanterns in what should be a modern hospital. And so that's our real aim, is how do we put medium scale into these, medium scale solar in a product that can be rapidly deployed into these clinics and run not just the vaccine storage or some DC computers, but everything in that clinic, the neonatal infant warmers, the microscopy, the CD4 counters, and of course the lighting. And that's really our thrust at this moment. And we've taken on a project to electrify 15 clinics in rural Zimbabwe for about $60,000, and now we're putting these into South Sudan with Médecins Sans Frontières. Thanks very much.
Oh, great. Thanks, Mike. So that's wonderful. Okay, and right on time. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. And sorry about the sound problems at the beginning.
No, I'm sorry as well.
Thank you. So now we'll go on to our fourth and last speaker. That's Ian Tansley. So let me just send him a request to share his screen. Hi, Ian. Are you there on the line?
Yes, I am. Hi, how are you doing?
Very good. Very well. Thank you. So great. And let me just and I'll just remind everybody to please keep sending in those questions, and also during Ian's presentation here, and we'll come back around to them in the Q&A. And that's wonderful, Ian. It's full screen. So Ian, please, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so my name's Ian Tansley. I've been working in the off-grid world for almost 30 years now. Interested to see some of the developments in solar off-grid and in the cook stove world, both worlds that I've touched in the past. But a lot of the time I spent working in the vaccine cold chain, so looking at health, providing health facilities in Africa and Asia. And so what this has led me to develop a new piece of technology, a very unique piece of technology that's perfect for really challenging conditions, that's very simple and very powerful. So I'll just spend a few minutes just kind of sharing the idea with you and the impact that it has. So UNICEF reckon that about 137 million doses of vaccine in 2013 lost their potency due to temperature damage. And so keeping vaccines at the right temperature, and the right temperature is between 2 and 8 degrees centigrade, is very important for them to keep their potency. And you might think that keeping them cold is the problem. They could just get warm if they're in hot countries, but actually it's the problem is often the other way around. Often it's the freezing of the vaccine that does the most damage. So it's somehow keeping the vaccines cold and at the right temperatures that's the biggest problem. So these are really challenging conditions, and we saw in the last presentation the power outage issues that are experienced, and that's not uncommon, that kind of mains power dropping out at random intervals, maybe for a few hours, maybe for a few days, who knows. So without that reliable power, then conventional refrigeration technology just fails. It won't work. It wasn't really designed for storing highly sensitive temperature products either. So inside your refrigerator at home, my refrigerator at home, the temperature is going up and down and way outside the limits that would be required for a vaccine refrigerator. And also support infrastructure for any kind of device, any kind of electrical device or any device at all is often lacking due to poor funding or poor infrastructure generally, bad roads, bad weather. So it's really, these are really challenging conditions to work under. It's not a simple fix. So we have a piece of technology that's quite unique. It can keep things cold for hours, days, weeks, even months with no power. We don't need a battery to store the energy in. As we saw earlier, the batteries are a really big problem, so we have to eliminate the battery from a system. And it's great for solar applications where by its very nature the energy input is intermittent. Also great for mains power, where you have intermittent power as well, but we're talking about off-grid at the moment. So let me just very quickly run you through what the vaccine cold chain looks like so you can understand the problem. Vaccine arrives from the vaccine manufacturer, usually via an aircraft, into a big central store that usually has electricity, mains power, taken by truck to some other stores in the country. They may have mains power, or they may have a generator. Moving down the line, you get more and more likely that the mains power won't be available, or it will be very intermittent. And as you move further down the vaccine cold chain towards the end, there's no mains power, and the best you can do is have solar energy. And probably 2 or 3 steps from the end, it's sensible to rely on solar energy. So there are challenges all the way down that line, and obviously there's kind of one primary store. There might be 6 state stores. There may be 50 at the next level and 500 at the next level. So these numbers kind of multiply. So the big number and the big problem is down in the villages. It's down in the lower parts of the cold chain. So these are some pictures of some facilities, the regional store on the left-hand side there from Madagascar. So those are cold rooms. Actually, the big white boxes in the picture there are cold rooms. The district store in Nigeria, you can see these are reasonably old pieces of equipment, but you can see from the state of the rooms that that funding isn't really there. The infrastructure isn't really there to support complicated devices. And the picture on the right-hand side is of a health centre in Ghana, where they were trying to use a kerosene refrigerator, and there are obvious problems with fuel supply and keeping up with the cost of fuel in a rural health centre. So where's the problem? The problem is that this is the result of a study done in Thailand some years ago. And you can see from this that the target temperature between 2 and 8 degrees centigrade, all of the vaccine in the study went above 8 degrees centigrade. 95% of it went below 2 degrees centigrade, but 74% of this went below 0. And that's, as I say, that's the thing that really does the damage to the vaccines. That can really destroy the potency of the vaccine. So that's the bit that's really difficult to fix. So what we needed was something that gave very accurate cooling, gave a guarantee not to freeze, would cool without power, and actively maintain temperature without power. Ideally, it hasn't a defrost. It doesn't need defrosting. It doesn't need a user to do anything to it. It just sits there and does its thing. So there are no controls, there are no dials, there are no switches, there's nothing for the user to do. Just open the door, there's the vaccine, and it's in perfect condition, it's being held at perfect temperature. So very quickly how this works. What we know is that that water is heaviest at 4 degrees centigrade. What we all know is if we heat water up, we see it rising in a pan of water as we heat the water. And we also all know that if we drop an ice cube into a glass of water, it will float. So we know hot water is lighter, and we know cold water is lighter. And what this is showing us is that water is heaviest at 4 degrees centigrade. So if we know the water is heaviest at 4 degrees centigrade, we can arrange it inside. This is the red portion there is a vessel full of water. We've taken it from sources in somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, so it's quite hot, the water. It's in an insulated box, and around the top of it we've wrapped, those little blue coils, we've wrapped a refrigeration circuit to cool that water down. And if we cool that water, start cooling that water, the water gets heavier, it falls to the bottom, the heaviest water is at 4 degrees centigrade, and that sits at the bottom of the column of water. And meanwhile the water at the top is still hot, it's still lighter, and so it's at the top. If we carry on cooling and cool and cool and cool, all the water becomes 4 degrees centigrade. But then something magic happens when after it's all become 4 degrees centigrade, because as we cool from the top, the water at the top turns into ice, and we start cooling from the top downwards. And what that means is that the bottom of this column of water is still at 4 degrees centigrade. So from the very beginning, when we started to put energy into this system, we had 4 degrees at the bottom, and even though now we have a device that's completely full of ice, all of our energy is being stored inside the device, the bottom is still at 4 degrees centigrade. And in fact, all of the water underneath the ice is at 4 degrees centigrade in this configuration, so we can store vaccines and frankly anything else that needs refrigerating very safely underneath that ice, and it will always be at 4 degrees centigrade. Every part of that compartment will be at 4 degrees centigrade. So we now have a very reliable way of storing energy in the form of the ice, and a very reliable way of maintaining exactly 4 degrees centigrade inside a compartment. So if we look at the difference between our refrigerator and a conventional vaccine refrigerator, the red line is a conventional vaccine refrigerator. You can see the limits of 2 and 8 degrees centigrade. Conventional vaccine refrigerator, this is one that was given full electricity all the time, and you can see the way the temperature bounces around. Ours is the blue line, used in exactly the same health center, exactly the same usage, and you can see it sitting around 4.5, 5 degrees centigrade, and when you open the door it goes up a little bit and then it comes back down again. So we have very reliable temperature control. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I'm realizing I'm close to the end of my 10 minutes, so I'm going to just try and romp through some of these. So we found use in medical, and medical is our main market. This is the most important market for us, and there are vaccines, short chill vaccine refrigerators in about 44 countries at the moment. There are several thousand refrigerators out there affecting the lives of millions of people. So already, even though we've barely scratched the surface of the market, this is already affecting the lives of millions of people. And in other applications, we can take this same technology and we can use it for broader pharmaceutical uses. We can use it for beverage cooling, other retail kind of cooling applications, for food, at source, at the farm level, at producer level, and even we can use it as part of the energy balancing grid. So this is essentially an energy storage device that you can put excess energy, excess generating capacity into, and have it released in a meaningful, useful way. So this is a piece of technology which is very simple, very robust, but has some very broad applications, both off-grid and on-grid. So that's me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Ian. That's great. So wonderful. So we'll move into our Q&A portion now. And thank you all for staying with us, and we're excited to get into some of your questions. And please do go ahead and keep sending your questions in if you've just thought of one, or if you have one for Ian. So we will start off with Joanna. Let me just go back to the questions that have come in for her and start us off with one. Let me see. All right, for Joanna, I'm just going to bring you off of mute. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, Molly. I've read all the questions, so I realise we're short on time. I can zip through them if you like. They're great questions.
If we can start with one, and then we'll come back around. So if there's one you're especially kind of wanting to answer, you think it kind of gets at a key issue, please start with the one that you prefer.
Sure. All right. Well, I love the question where somebody asked about if we're breeding better varieties to increase yield, will that mean we decrease the nutritional value? Is there a trade-off there? And that was challenged quite a few years ago. An initiative called Harvest Plus, part of the CGIAR that we're part of, challenged that. So now Ecosat did the breeding for pearl millet, and we did achieve both increasing the iron and zinc levels while also increasing the yields. And now we're doing that for sorghum. So it was a question that people thought wasn't achievable, and we proved that you can increase both yields and nutritional value together.
That's awesome. Thank you, Joanna. Wonderful. So I'll come back around to you. We'll just do a quick round and come back, okay?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So moving on to our next presenter, that was Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Hi there.
Hi. So I can see you've already been answering people's questions directly, but maybe as Joanna did, is there one that you would particularly like to share with the audience, or otherwise I can pick one?
Go on, pick one.
All right, let me go ahead and pick one. Let me see here. Bear with me just a moment. I will just see. Okay, there's one that came here coming from Ruth Mendham, and she's asking, in some regions, 3 stone fires are also used for heating in the Kenyan highlands, for example. That can lead to the rejection of improved cook stoves, in particular if elderly or small children are in the household. So that's a challenge. Any ideas on how to address this issue?
Well, some of the improved cook stoves are actually very effective space heaters as well. So this is quite rightly a problem in places like Kenyan highlands. It's also a problem in the highlands of Peru. The stove that we were evaluating in the study, the Philips stove, and also the one that's followed it, the ACE1 stove, they burn very cleanly, and they kick out a lot of heat. So actually, those particular ones are quite good as space heaters as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. We'll come back around to you in the Q&A. Okay. Hi, Mike. So let me just ask Mike Rosenberg a question here. So the question that I have for you is, what are the capital costs for establishing a functional power unit at a health center? And how is this technology likely limited by poor internet connectivity in most of rural Africa?
That's a great question. So we're pretty transparent on pricing. The retail cost of the solar enabler is about $3,500.
Okay, Mike, sorry, I can just barely hear you. I don't know if maybe...
Is this any better?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yes, so the retail cost of the solar enabler is transparent. It's $3,500. It's about $3,000 wholesale. We take a bring your own panels approach, but we also include panels at cost, which these days are about 40 cents per watt, and they have the benefit that most African countries have waived duties and VAT on solar. So that means with 12 solar panels, a 3 kilowatt array, the solar enabler with its battery and off-grid electronics, and installation, which is typically about $200, we're below $5,000. Now, that won't power an X-ray machine, but it can handle the core load of most clinics, so the lighting, the discrete medical appliances. So for instance, a sterilizer will use a lot of power but only for a 10 to 20 minute burst. And that's really where this product fits in, is ensuring that core electricity load has that performance. Internet connectivity is pretty dire when it comes to things like Wi-Fi or LAN, but we bundle in a SIM card, and what we found is that pretty much everywhere we can get at least 1 bar of a GPRS signal, and we actually use antennas in the box to boost that internet signal. And by removing the need for people to provide their own SIM card and top them up, but actually integrating a roaming SIM card, we can guarantee access to the box on a sort of 1-minute basis. So we take 1-minute timestamps of the data, we upload them every day into the cloud so people can see how these are performing, and we can introduce things like predictive maintenance. But we haven't deployed one of these in an area where we've had no 2G signal. In northeast Nigeria, some of the telco towers have been sabotaged, and so we're actually working with Inmarsat to add a low-cost satellite connection to those solar enablers so that they can have a constant internet connection.
Great, great, thank you. I had a feeling you might have an answer to the internet connection point, so that's great. Okay, so going on to Ian. Hi, Ian. Are you there?
Hi.
Okay, wonderful. So I have a question for you. I have a few questions for you. To start off, someone was asking about the cost difference between the SureChill versus kind of the standard medical fridge or refrigerator that you would use for medicines and vaccines. On the cost point, how does that pan out? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about kind of who your customers are. That's also maybe interesting for the audience.
Okay, sure. So so the costs, obviously what we're adding into the refrigerator is a vessel with some water inside it, and that's really the only additional cost. There are actually some costs that can come out of a conventional refrigerator at the same time, so some of the control system comes out. So actually we end up round about the same price as a conventional refrigerator that's trying to do the same thing. So in medical refrigerator terms, we are very cost competitive. What we've done is partner up with a couple of manufacturers, one in Africa and one in India, to manufacture the refrigerators locally so that we can bring the cost down and also increase the coverage of the support network for the refrigerators in those regions. So in terms of cost, not much change, and volume per volume. So if you made these things as domestic refrigerators, which they're not yet, but if you made them in the same kind of quantity that you make domestic refrigerators, you could expect one to be about the same price as a conventional domestic refrigerator. So, and who are the customers? Our customers generally are they are ministries of health. They are people like Médecins Sans Frontières, Oxfam, the UN. So UNICEF is responsible, United Nations Children's Fund is responsible for the majority of purchases of vaccines and vaccine cold chain equipment, and so they end up being one of our major customers. But a lot of their funding comes through other people, through driven by people like the Gates Foundation and people like that.
Okay, great. Great. Thanks so much for that. So we'll come back around to you in the second round. So coming back to Joanna. Joanna, you've had a chance to look at all of the questions there. I imagine there's another one that you're quite keen to answer. Is there one that you'd especially like to respond to?
Yeah, sure, Molly. There was a question about the fact that millets and sorghum have a stigma of not being modern, and how do we remove this? And that's certainly an issue that I brought up, and that's come about over the years. And that's another reason why we think this whole consumer demand-driven approach is core in that, because we have to change the image, and we have to do it by creating a buzz around it, make it exciting. It's not a case of informing people. It's not an awareness campaign. This is true marketing, and it's about yeah, really creating that buzz around it, and part of it is even creating modern convenience products with these foods, but doing it in a way that keeps the nutritional value as well.
Great, great, Joanna. Since that was kind of a short one, was there another question that you'd like to reply to?
Yeah, actually this is one I think a lot of people would probably think about. Someone asked about millets versus quinoa and how similar are they. Actually nutritionally they're very, very similar. I mean they're both really what you could call a superfood. And now millets and sorghum vary a lot because it's a lot of different types of millets and each have different characteristics. But there is one particular millet, the finger millet, which stands out from quinoa in regards to the calcium. So the finger millet is the one that I mentioned, which has 3 times the amount of calcium as milk, and it has double the amount of calcium as quinoa. But quinoa is a good example in that it wasn't well known, and it was marketing that got it known. And that's what we can, and there's actually a lot of articles around saying that millets are the next quinoa, because they're unknown. But another difference between the two is we're not saying millets and sorghum should be everywhere. There's agroecologies that they're suited to, where unfortunately water guzzling crops and other unsuitable crops have sort of come in because of policies and other sort of support. So we're saying, with this whole UN idea of sustainable diets as well, it's about where different crops are suitable to grow as well as the whole consumption side.
Great. Thanks so much, Joanna.
Yeah, great.
So moving on to Kevin, we've got a question here. It's a pretty big question for you on cook stoves. So the question is, the use of improved cook stoves has been in place for many decades now in Africa with the intent to reduce cutting down firewood collection and charcoal burning. But the rate of uptake and adoption has been very low and disappointing. Do you have any thoughts why this is so, even though the benefits seem so obvious?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's a difficult one to answer concisely. I mean, a big part of the problem is poverty. The people that are out there, particularly in rural sub-Saharan Africa, are amongst the world's poorest people, and the use of what's essentially free fuel, be that crop residues or wood, in a free cooking device, which is the 3-stone fire, is essentially a marker of poverty. To do anything beyond that involves spending resource that's, let's say, splitting the $1 a day that they have to live on, and diverting some of that funds from whatever else they might be used for, be that buying food, buying fertilizer for the crops, putting shoes on the feet of the kids, paying the school fees. So I guess a default is to use what is free. Whatever else is done involves some kind of cost somewhere along the line. Even the very cheap and cheerful clay stoves that can cost just a few dollars and reduce fuel use by about 40%. Even they come with a cost, and they don't last forever. And so, little by little, it's a kind of return to what everyone's familiar with and what is free and easy to use. The stoves that we studied in our study cost approaching $100 each by the time we got them into Malawi, and that's way beyond the reach of people in sub-Saharan Africa, and we had to spend a lot of money and a lot of effort maintaining them. So the sad reality of the stoves in our study is that I'm pretty sure that within a year almost none of them will still be functional, and sadly that's the story of improved stoves and improved stove programs.
Thank you for that answer, Kevin. And just to follow that question, a related question for Mike. Hi, Mike.
Yep.
So the question we have for you is kind of related to that. So in the way that many of the cook stoves will become disused, what about the PV systems that you install? How do you ensure that they stay up and running, or how do you avoid that common problem where off-grid systems in rural areas stop working and then there's no way to fix them, spare parts and technical know-how and so on? How do you address that?
Yes, this is something we grappled with with traditional solar systems, where we would have, mice eating the cables, or the batteries would fail, and we wouldn't know until we sent an engineer at a cost of hundreds of dollars to fault test it. So from the very beginning, we wanted to have live internet access to the system and to really be able to introduce, for the first time in affordable off-grid, predictive maintenance, so that we can see if something is overheating, if the battery is performing irregularly. I mean, the panels are pretty reliable. We have theft issues from time to time. The biggest challenge on maintenance is actually cleaning the dust off of the panels. And the exciting thing with a constant internet connection and the analytics is that we can see that the voltage is starting to drop despite, seasonal conditions indicating it should be working. And so then we can send a notification. And so right now we have, our sort of super admin dashboard for ourselves. We have an admin dashboard for someone like DFID who's running multiple clinics, but we also have a link to the clinic operator or the school principal, so that they can get an alert on their phone that this system that needs that kind of maintenance, that the panels have to be cleaned, or that a spare part is going to need to be replaced in the next few weeks, and we can organize that predictive maintenance. And so really introduce the kind of credibility that's missing with solar in Africa right now, which is that there are so many failed projects where these things are put in place and then they're mothballed because some part fails and there's no insight into why that failure happened. So really, we're just starting to scoop up these analytics, but by having a touch screen on the system, by having a smartphone app, by having the mobile phone number of the clinic operator, we can communicate with that clinic and let them know what maintenance needs to happen at a community level.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So to go to Ian, and I think this will be our last question in the Q&A round here, but we do have all of your questions and those will be passed on to the panelists. So if you've not yet had an answer, you may receive one by email from one of the panelists as well, just to follow up your questions. So Ian, for your question, sorry, I just had it here. So for your question, so one participant says, this is brilliant for the health sector, Ian. For other uses, for beverage, food, etc., what are the likely costs? And also, this is interesting, also the kind of training that is needed for users and locals to ensure that they can keep the systems working efficiently?
Okay, great, lovely question, thank you. I would echo what Mike said actually about the connectivity and what a massive difference that's making to our ability to be able to keep systems running in these places. So on the how do these systems, how are they what's the word, sorry, sustainable? I would say that that's really feeding into that system. So likely costs, as I said before, are likely to be comparable to conventional systems. So like for like on a beverage cooler, a domestic refrigerator. So in that kind of refrigerator format, you're likely to see, as we build volumes and as we're able to mass produce the units, you're likely to see costs that are very similar. On larger scale systems, I'm not so hung up on the source of energy. So we use solar photovoltaics for the solar-powered, solar direct drive refrigerators that we use for vaccines, but I would use other kinds of cooling technologies for larger scale food coolers, for instance. So I wouldn't be stuck with that. And training, yeah, absolutely. A constant source of frustration for me over the last almost 30 years is the lack of ability, lack of opportunity to provide the training that's required alongside any technology at all, particularly with the vaccine refrigerators. That's been the biggest cause of problems and failures. So with proper training provided, which we For the vaccine refrigerators, we built up a program, a very detailed program, support program for providing training at every single level. So that is absolutely essential, and we are keen to provide that training as part of the package of supply. But also that ability to be able to monitor, diagnose, and provide preventative maintenance routines is also opening up some really massive opportunities to create sustainability in this market.
Great, thank you, Ian. Thank you. So actually I have one more question. This one is for Kevin. This is coming from one of my colleagues who's a co-organizer of the webinar, so from John Cloak at LCEDN. So we have a question here for you, Kevin, and I think it's a nice one to kind of close on because it's actually kind of, yeah, it's quite an interesting question. So literature that I've read suggests that the most effective insect repellent is wood smoke. If you get rid of wood smoke fires, are you not trading better air for less protection from insect-borne diseases?
Yeah, so this is, there isn't consensus and there isn't good evidence here, but it is a bit of a worry. In fact, we monitored, in the cooking and pneumonia study, we monitored various adverse effects. The only, apart from burns, the only difference between the intervention and control group was a slightly higher risk of malaria in the cleaner cook stove group compared to the open fire group. It's quite possible this was just a chance finding, but it does raise concern about potential inadvertent adverse effects of what's otherwise a well-intended intervention like a cleaner cook stove. And I think helps to emphasize the importance of conducting well-designed clinical studies of promising interventions before planning large-scale rollout, to firstly test out the effectiveness of the intervention, but also to carefully evaluate for any potential adverse effects, including this one, that what happens if we're not keeping the insects away. As it happens, on balance, well, the health benefit of the cook stoves we studied was a reduction in burns, and that probably outweighed any slight increase in malaria. But it's a topic that needs further work, I think it's fair to say.
And I think that's a great note to end on. And I just want to thank everyone. I mean, I think we've had some very, very interesting and presentations across several different topics. So everything from smart food and nutrition to clean cook stoves, and perhaps this is actually going to be a follow-up webinar. We're going to look at unintended consequences of different types of interventions in development, and I think that is kind of leading us toward that point of, yeah, exactly, what are the unintended consequences that can happen when we all go in with our best intentions, and the importance, exactly as Kevin was saying, of well-designed research first and foremost to assess really the effects there. And then, of course, Mike Rosenberg's work with Alusha on the solar enabler, which is really a fantastic breakthrough and very, very interesting to talk with him about. So so hopefully we'll have him back again. He's a returning presenter already, so perhaps next year as well. And then finally, Ian Tansley telling us all about Sure Chill and ways to keep vaccines cool but not too cold, as he pointed out in his presentation, and again bringing out one of the points that that many of us might not realize automatically, that being too cold can be just as bad as being too hot in the vaccine and in the vaccine world. So let me just take everyone off mute here and just say thank you to you all. And I also just want to invite the audience to please stick around. There is a survey that pops up at the end. It only takes a couple of minutes. We'd really love to hear your thoughts and let us know how it went for you and what you were most interested in, and maybe what you'd like to see in the future. We'd really love to hear from you. And as well, if you do want to get in touch with me, feel free to write to me. I will put my email here in the chat box so you can all send me an email or as well to my colleague Ed Brown, and I can pass those along to him as well at LCEDN. Yeah, so I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you, Joanna, Kevin.
You're welcome. Thanks, Molly.
Yeah, Mike and Ian, thank you all for being here today. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
So, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. And thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here. Our next webinar should be on the 22nd of March, and we will let you know more about that, of course. Okay, thank you very much, and please stick around for the survey.